From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel, a podcast from the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. And I am here this week with California Congressman Khanna as we talk about the momentous news of Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from the race and as the party coalesces around Kamala Harris. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for being here. It's obviously a very momentous time in politics. I do want to talk a little bit about this new trajectory in the Democratic Party, which looks to be around Kamala Harris. But a couple of questions about President Biden first. He's getting a lot of praise that this was the right thing to do to step down. And I think we can agree that is the case. I think we might also be able to agree that he might not have done this had it not been for party leaders and elected officials, both publicly and privately, pushing him to do so. Was that the right call for Democrats to join together and push out their nominee?
I don't like the way it was done. I think the president had won 14 million votes, and people could have expressed their concerns to him privately, but it had to be his decision. He obviously made that decision in consultation with his family, but I don't like the fact that elected leaders and donors were trying to pressure someone who had won the votes for the nomination. Now, I am enthusiastic about Vice President Harris and think she has a great shot to win, but I think the president also had a good shot to win.
Let me ask you this. I don't necessarily join these voices. There are a lot of Republicans, though, that are making the argument that if he made the decision he wasn't in a position to do another 4 years, he also should have resigned. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, and the Republicans know better. I mean, they're just playing politics. There's a different stamina and skill needed to run for president than there is to be president. The two require two very different things. When you're president, you have to be completely alert in your judgment, and I take the president at his word and that he is. But when you're running for president, you got to be in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan on the same day while raising money. That's just a different level of vigor that's required.
I very much understand Democratic arguments that he was facing a tough electoral path to re-election and that this was an argument for him to get out. But coming when this close to an election, do you have any concerns that it creates a bit of vulnerability for the United States? Our adversaries are watching. They see a bit of chaos going on here and this president who looks to have been very weakened. How much does that concern you?
It does not, because we have the greatest military in the world. And I have the privilege of serving on the Armed Services Committee. Even at times where I was so concerned about President Trump's rhetoric, I always knew that we had the greatest military and many military leaders. I believe that now. And when there is crisis, America responds, and we often respond with unity. We did after COVID, when it came to the CARES Act, when it came to developing vaccines. So adversaries underestimate America at their own peril. We are the strongest nation. We may have dysfunction at times in our politics, but Americans know how to come together.
So let's turn to the person who looks to be the future of the party, the president, many members of the House, yourself included, many senators, governors, even some of Kamala Harris's would-be rivals have already come out to endorse her. The line from the party seems to be, we want to unify and move on. But, not everyone out there has taken that view. I saw Vinod Khosla, who's a quite prominent donor, saying that there needs to be a more open process. Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, saying you ought to have a mini primary. Make the case for why Democrats should essentially just coronate this one person and move ahead.
Well, I know Vinod for years. He's a brilliant entrepreneur, and I understand and support sort of President Obama or Vinod Khosla's view that there should be an open process at the convention for anyone who wants to run. I don't think that there should be just a default for Kamala Harris. Now, in that open process, people can endorse, and I'm saying I'm endorsing Kamala Harris because I think she's the best person to defeat Donald Trump and to carry us forward. But if some senator or congressperson or personality wants to come forward and challenge her on issues or challenge her for the nomination, I totally support their right to do that. If someone can get 300 delegates, then they should run, and there should be an open process. They should be allowed to make a speech to the delegates. They should make their argument, and, they should try to get people to endorse them. But the real issue is that all the people who were thinking about it or serious endorsed Kamala Harris. And this happens in elections all the time. You're running for the House of Representatives. It's an open seat. 10 candidates may think about running, and then one candidate emerges with a lot of support and others endorse them. And that doesn't mean that the process isn't open. It just means a candidate was very strong.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few. I am back with Ro Khanna, Democratic congressman from California, discussing these big changes in the presidential race. Well, let me ask you this. Is that another mistake, just in that I think there's been a lot of soul searching among Democrats about the fact that nobody really did challenge Joe Biden? I mean, Dean Phillips did. He was, by the way, pretty scorned by a lot in the establishment. Now that we've got this opportunity, wouldn't it actually be maybe healthy for the party to have an open convention, have some challengers, having gone through this and ended up with a nominee that in the end they decided wasn't the best bet?
Well, I never scorned Dean Phillips. In fact, I always said I respected and admired his chutzpah for running. And I think in some senses, Dean was pointing out issues that unfortunately came to pass. So I think he has nothing to feel embarrassed about in what he did. I guess my point is you can't force people to run. And these are Biden-Harris delegates. And if you're a savvy politician, thoughtful politician, you're looking at this and you're saying, well, these are delegates who all voted for the Biden-Harris ticket. Am I really going to be able to persuade them not to vote for the vice president when the president of the United States is endorsing her? And so I don't think anyone has blocked the openness of the process. I just think, Whitmer and Newsom and Buttigieg, the few people who are being bandied about, looked at it and made a decision they didn't want to run.
Do you think those 14 million Democratic primary voters get that, the argument you're making, or will they feel as though this has been kind of a backroom process?
Well, after they all listen to your podcast, they'll get it. But I think this is why President Obama has been so careful in trying to articulate that process. And I think it's going to be important for the vice president to continue to say she wants to earn the votes. I don't think if there's someone who wants to run because of an issue they care about or in any way, I don't think we should make it hard. I think we should actually encourage it. They may care about Gaza. They may care about some issue about progressive policy. They may care, like Joe Manchin, about moving the party in a more centrist direction. And we should respect that and be open to that. And the vice president should say the same thing, that she welcomes any competition. But she's doing the right thing by going and getting endorsements. I mean, when I ran for Congress, first thing I tried to do is get a lot of people to endorse me. So you can't blame her for trying to get support.
No, she certainly does seem to be shoring it up, not just among elected representatives, but I see trade unions, donors, etc. Let me ask a separate question. What, in your mind, should she be looking at when it comes to a running mate? And who would be a couple of your top picks?
I would think about Scranton Joe, because I think that he had a real emotional connection with the working class, middle class that felt that the country had left them out, that had gotten shafted by globalization, that was a bit concerned with all of the technological economic change. I'm going to Johnstown, Pennsylvania this week to announce a new steel bill with steel workers. So people who know where Johnstown, Pennsylvania is and connect with that. So given that criteria, I would think that some of these Midwest governors, Governor Shapiro, Governor Whitmer, Governor Beshear, are thoughtful people who have been to places like downriver Michigan and Johnstown and Ashtabula County and can speak to the emotional connection, having an emotional connection with voters there.
Let me ask on that point, you're talking a little bit about the need for the Democratic ticket. We are assuming Kamala Harris to reach out to working class voters. I think that's some of the folks you're talking about in terms of Scranton Joe. Where else does Kamala Harris define herself? Does she come out and essentially run as a continuation of the Biden agenda, in part because she has been part of that for 3.5 years? Or given some of the low approval ratings the president has received on some really top ticket items for voters, in particular the border, inflation, is this an opportunity for the party to look a different direction, or would that be a bad idea?
I think she needs to look at what the speech the president gave in Detroit and make it clear that we have a bold economic vision different from the first term for the next term. Yes, she needs to tout the new factories that have come up under the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, but she also needs to talk about capping rent. She needs to talk about getting childcare. She needs to talk about expanding Social Security. She needs to say that if you're working in America, you shouldn't be poor and a living wage. And she needs to run on a populist economic agenda. I mean, the reason that so many progressives like Bernie Sanders and me stuck with President Biden was we saw saw him really pivoting to a more working class populist economic agenda. And I think that the vice president would be well served to continue with that move that President Biden was making in order to get the votes that she's going to need.
I would agree with you on that. At the same time, it seems as though the real focus and the concern a lot in the party have had has been about revving up the liberal base, the real vote goers out there. And you've heard the president doubling down on some policies that are really quite progressive, things like eliminating medical debt, for instance. How do you walk that line, as it were? How do you re-excite the Democratic base with some big, bold policies, but not turn off those working class voters that are so important too?
Well, I think there's a realignment where you look at J.D. Vance and he's saying, okay, these folks in rural communities and factory towns have been left behind. I think you say, well, J.D. Vance, the corporate tax cuts aren't going to make their life better. Just restricting legal immigration isn't going to make their life better. Just having massive tariffs on even our allies isn't going to make their life better. You know what is going to make their life better? Having federal investment in new factories, having child care provided at $10 a day, getting rid of their medical debt, having them make a living wage, having them be able to join a union. And so I think, you can take progressive, bold economic policy and connect it into the left out communities, especially in a Republican Party that isn't as wedded anymore to kind of the Romney free market absolutism. I think that there is an opportunity for a populist economic agenda to speak to the very needs of Trump-Vance voters that we need to win this election.
Should Kamala Harris, assuming that she does become the nominee, do a debate with Donald Trump?
Absolutely. The question is whether he would want to do a debate with her. But, I think he's clearly seen that one bad debate can kill you. And this more than 4 trials and convictions, it's a bad debate that ends your career in American politics. That's what we've all concluded out of this last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think we definitely got a wake-up call over the last 3 weeks. Are there concerns within the Democratic Party? Republicans are talking about challenging some of these ballots in some of the states, ticket swapping, switching his name for hers. How much of a legal concern is there?
There's no legal concern. I mean, we have our rules in the convention that you have delegates who vote for the nominee. I mean, the primary process just informs the delegates. So, I mean, they'll create noise and it's a political hit. But if they want to talk about that, well, we're talking about helping give people child care and giving them a wage increase. I'll take that all day long.
Hang tight. We're going to take one more break.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
And I am back again with Congressman Khanna, Democrat from California, talking about Joe Biden's decision to withdraw and the party coalescing around Kamala Harris. How much do you think it might hurt her or candidates who are up for re-election this year? This lingering claim. And you can tell that Republicans are going to double down on this because they're working on ads coming out and they're going to say, look, Democrats knew that the president had a problem. He was failing. They are complicit in the fact that we are now where we are now. And by the way, Kamala Harris, more than anyone, bears responsibility for that because she was the vice president who probably saw him more than anybody else.
I think the vice president just has to be honest and transparent, and I think that she can diffuse that issue, which is to say the president is capable of leading this country. He has shown extraordinary judgment on foreign policy. Donald Trump's the one who wants to give up some of Ukraine to Russia. The president is leading and active in all of these conversations, and he made the decision not to run, but he's perfectly capable of the job. And then if for some reason that was not the case, then she needs to come out and be honest with the American people. But as long as she's transparent, I don't think that will be a big issue.
Where do you see her path in the Electoral College to a victory? How does this change things for the White House?
I still think that we've got to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I think she gives us a better shot now in Michigan, clearly, and Wisconsin, because I think the Gaza issue is not going to be as tied directly to her, and she's been a bit more empathetic to Palestinian rights just based on her background. But those are the 3 key states. I also think she gives us a new breath of fresh air in Nevada and Arizona, especially if she were to pick someone like Mark Kelly in Arizona. So those would be the states that I think are key for our winning.
Do Republicans make a mistake? You see right now, a lot of them are coming out. There's already ads being cut saying Kamala Harris is just an extension of Joe Biden. We're going to treat her as such. But it strikes me that Donald Trump and the ticket might be well to recognize that they're no longer running against an 80-some-year-old white guy who, has a term and he does have accomplishments, but also liabilities under his belt. But they're now running against a woman, an African-American woman. It seems as though that does phenomenally shake up the way the dynamics of this race would be.
I agree with you. One, it centers, in my view, women's rights, abortion rights, men not controlling women in what they do. And I think Kamala Harris will put that front and center. It's why I think she should really consider having Gretchen Whitmer and an all-women ticket. I think it could energize the country. I don't buy this conventional wisdom that it has to be a white male, and I think that she is so different demographically and what she represents than Joe Biden that she's going to be seen as a change candidate. The biggest risk, in my view, and we'll see if they can resist that, the Trump campaign has, is if they devolve into blatant racism or sexism, and that I think can backfire. So we'll see if they're restrained enough or if people around them overplay their hand.
Yeah, but at the same time, I wonder, how does she overcome? Look, she did run a very different campaign than Joe Biden did when she was in the primary in 2020. This is a person who wanted to eliminate all fracking, not just fracking on public grounds. She said she wanted to entirely repeal the Trump tax cuts, no exception for those earning up to $400,000. Medicare for all, essentially the socialization of the healthcare system. Joe Biden was very wary of those. She's strongly on the record for them. Isn't that going to haunt her?
Well, I take exception just on the Medicare for all because you'd still have your doctors and your nurses under Medicare for all. It just means that you have national health insurance. But look, John Fetterman ran on that and won in Pennsylvania. But I think that candidates change. When I first ran for Congress, I lost 71 to 19%. And that candidate that I was when I ran for Congress probably would never have won for Congress. But I grew as a person and I listened more. And I'm sure that Kamala Harris, after 3.5 years of being with President Biden and Vice President, is not the same candidate as she was in 2020. And I think Republicans are making a big mistake by assuming that they're running against the Kamala Harris of 2019 and not the Kamala Harris who's giving amazing speeches, electric speeches in some places, in 2024. One of my friends who's a political consultant said about Dick Gephardt, he started out as the most boring candidate, and by the end of the campaign trail, he was sounding like Bobby Kennedy. So people get better at politics.
Well, the amazing thing is we are both going to be front row witnesses to this pretty astonishing moment in history. So thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you again, Congressman Khanna, for coming on with us. Thank you to my listeners. This is a weekly podcast. We hope you will go and hit the subscribe button and become regular followers. Also, take a look at All Things with Kim Strassel, the newsletter, also coming out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe to that on our web pages.